Well, hi and welcome to BPD Update. I'm Steve Strand, your Chief of Police at the Bremerton Police Department, and welcome to this edition of BPD Update. This time we are joined, we're lucky to be joined by Sergeant Mark Thompson. Sergeant Thompson is a veteran sergeant with the Bremerton Police Department, and part of what he does, in addition to being a patrol sergeant and, as I mentioned, a very experienced supervisor with our department, is he is also a firearms instructor, a range instructor. We'll talk a little bit today about the range, the gun range, firearms training, and some of those things that you know we do in law enforcement, but you may have some questions about it and wonder sort of how we do that. So first of all, welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Chief.
Good to have you with us. Now, everybody knows that police officers carry guns. We walk around with a firearm, obviously, on our gun belt. There's so many TV shows about police officers and law enforcement, and frankly, it's one of the things that people are interested in, sometimes almost too interested in that aspect of our job. Talk a little bit, if you could, about, we've always carried firearms, we've always carried guns. It seems obvious why we do, but as a supervisor and as a veteran officer, talk a little bit about why is it so important that we have firearms accessible to us, and why it's so important that we feel comfortable with them.
Without a doubt, we probably have one of the best firearms program in the state. We train above the minimum standard, which the state requires 70%, and we qualify at 80%. So that helps us, that gives us more training and better proficiency with a firearm. And that's the way we train. We train 4 times a year, and it's going to help us. It's going to prepare us for the ultimate deal. So
being prepared, you talk about being prepared, which is sort of the epitome of this job, is to be prepared, and I sometimes use the phrase comfortable. In other words, the first time a police officer may have to use deadly force, including using a firearm, using a taser, using physical force of some sort, as well as the things that we do every day, using our verbal skills. They need to be comfortable with all of those things because it's all an important part of our job. And you mentioned, Sergeant Thompson, that we have actually an 80% requirement for our officers for training for firearms. When an officer, they're carrying a firearm, the fact is that most police officers finish their career never having used a firearm other than in training. But what are some of the reasons, and again, it's sort of obvious, but talk a little bit about your experience and some of the reasons that it's so important that we are comfortable with and proficient with firearms.
Yeah. What we train out here, usually when we train out here, we try to train as realistically as we can. And what happens out here in our training is going to happen to the guys out on the street. So if we have really good training here, really good training, when that happens, they'll be prepared for it.
Right, and exactly. And again, we keep talking about preparation, but that's why it's so important. And I mentioned that it's sort of the most extreme example of the kind of decisions that police officers have to make is using a firearm. And of course, it can be a life or death decision. But as I sometimes say to people, firearms are a controversial subject in our society right now. A lot of people talking a lot politically about firearms and people's access to them and ways that they might be controlled in our society, and something that obviously politically is sort of volatile right now. But at the end of the day, when people are using firearms in the wrong way, criminally, the people that show up are police officers. So if we want to make our police officers really comfortable with and proficient with firearms, give us just sort of a general overview, and we're standing right now at our Bremerton PD firing range, as a matter of fact. Give us a general overview of how we prepare officers to be comfortable with and proficient with firearms.
Okay, we qualify 4 times a year. 3 of them are a mandatory shoot. We train with the rifle and the sidearm. We've incorporated some of our defensive tactics into the firearms program because we have less than lethal that we use. We have the 40 millimeter Mike, it shoots the big plastic projectile. We have mace, we have tasers, and we train with all that.
Right.
And so that's basically where we're at.
So every officer is going to train with every one of those things that they may encounter.
Everything.
So that they're proficient in it. So let's back up just a little bit. You talked about less lethal or less than lethal. And a lot of times people will hear about law enforcement using a firearm or using something like less than lethal armaments. on the news, or when something bad happens, or unfortunately sometimes when it's used against someone, and there's a difficult decision that has to be made by a police officer. I think most people understand when we talk about a firearm that we carry on our hip, our sidearm or our pistol. They understand certainly when we train with rifles, which our officers also train with, which has a particular kind of capability. Less than lethal, talk a little bit about that. What is it? Why do we use it?
We use those. So we can start from the low end of force.
Okay.
Okay. Say a guy's with a knife.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. So in other words, it's just what it sounds like. It's less than lethal. Not deadly force.
It's not deadly force.
Okay.
And a lot of, probably 90% of these situations we get into, we can settle it with the less than lethal,
Right.
with a taser or a pepper spray,
Right.
or the 40 millimeter.
Obviously, most people know, we use a rifle, has certain capabilities. We use a firearm, has certain capabilities, or our pistol that we would carry with us. And a lot of people know what a taser is. That's sort of become commonly known. It's an electric shock that it can incapacitate someone, that doesn't it doesn't lead to deadly force. So there's sort of this range of options that we want officers to be comfortable with. And one of the things we talked about was it's called less than lethal. Can you describe for us what does that mean? How does it work?
That's of course, it's not deadly force. It's less than lethal, and we use that probably 90% of the time. We can stop a threat by starting at the low end,
Right.
and moving up until we get them. This here is one of our tools. It's a 40 millimeter rifle, I guess you could call it.
Sort of looks like a large shotgun almost.
Sure, and it shoots a hard rubber projectile.
So this is just basically a ping pong sized piece of rubber.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and it's very effective, and you don't have to get real close.
So for example, a suspect who might be using drugs or drunk or having some sort of other issue, who might have a knife, might have some sort of other weapon that they're threatening either residents with or police officers with, this is potentially an option to stop that without having to use a firearm.
Definitely very effective.
Again, when we talk about firearms, and everybody sort of attaches the idea of deadly force, and police officers carry guns, and all we know is deadly force, it's really interesting to me, and I've certainly seen it evolve in my career, how we've built a whole toolbox, in effect, of different things to use in those, again, relatively rare occasions. I mean, most shifts go by with police officers never having to use any kind of force. Weeks go by, months go by in some cases, but when it happens, and we have to be ready for it. Most of the time, we as police officers spend our time simply talking to people, solving problems, and dealing with issues that are relatively, certainly nonviolent. But of course, because of the nature of our jobs, these are the things we have to be ready for. So we're standing in the Bremerton Police Department firearms range. This is a facility of the Bremerton Police Department. You are one of our certified firearms instructors.
Yes.
Talk about what that entails and what you do for us.
The firearms instructor course is 80 hours, and they just don't teach guys how to shoot. They teach them how to instruct. So there's a instructor development course within there, and after their 80 hours, they get certified, and we come out here and we show them how to run a range. And
As a certified firearms instructor, one of several we have at the Bremerton Police Department, question that I have is, you probably have people at all different levels of expertise who come into law enforcement. This is true of every department. You have people that are very, very proficient. They probably used firearms a lot in the military, and others that have never even touched a firearm. What role do you play in making sure that everybody feels comfortable?
We're getting back to the certified instructors. They 80 hours of training, and they come out, and it's more or less a team effort here. These guys write up the scenarios, and of course, they have to go through me and then through Captain Wolf. And we do the basic PPCs out here, where that's required by the state. That is the handgun qualification, and like we talked about before, they require 70%. We require 80%.
So we have chosen to have a higher standard than required by the state.
Right,
Okay.
we have. And the rifle is the same thing. I don't think they shoot many rifles in the academy, because every department has a different rifle.
Right.
But our rifle qualifications are at 80% also.
Okay. So we generally have a higher standard, we have a higher expectation for our police officers than is required statewide and by most departments. And again, I'll get back to my strong opinion on this, which is not so much, proficiency is important, but comfort. Because I find it, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about this, Sergeant Thompson, but I find that an officer who is comfortable with any kind of use of force is a safer officer. And the ultimate goal is for our officers to be safe and the public to be safe. Correct. And somebody feeling like, stressed out, not feeling comfortable is obviously not a safe situation. So when an officer comes out of the academy, they're brand new. Mm-hmm. All they've done is what's in the academy. Sort of what do you walk them through to make sure that they're up to the standards we expect?
Well, they shoot the same courses as the veteran officers do. Mm-hmm. And if they have problems, we take time with them. Mm-hmm. We remedial training, and we get them up to the standard where we think they ought to be.
Okay. Related question. Sometimes I think people feel like the sort of their vision from TV of training and firearms, particularly for law enforcement, is people just standing out on a line and firing at a target, which is part of what we do, and you'll see some of that. But talk a little bit about throwing in different scenarios or throwing in different wrinkles for officers to deal with, sort of problems that they have to deal with, so that they're trained and comfortable with that too.
Yeah, one of the big issues is the malfunctions with the handguns, and we'll set up their handgun to where it will malfunction. Mm-hmm. And we have clearance drills that we put them through. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with a rifle. Okay. That sometimes they break, right, and you have to transition from your rifle to your handgun. Okay. So there's lots of scenarios, and it's a lot of them. It doesn't just include throwing a lot of lead down range. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other skills that we work out. With trigger control and mm-hmm. and sight picture and there's a lot of aspects to it that it's not just shooting. It's a lot of mental preparation. Right. And a lot of it, again, the theme that I hear continually from a good firearms instructor like yourself is preparation and knowing that whatever comes up, you can deal with it, so that people don't sort of melt down and just stop. It's okay, that's all right, I can do something else and move on from there. That's what I've always learned from people like you at the firearms range. Let's shift gears just a little bit. We've been talking about our training and our use of firearms in law enforcement, and that's important, and I think it's important for residents of Bremerton to be aware of it, and it's something that a lot of people are interested in. But the fact is, this is a country with the Second Amendment. We've all heard the statistics that there's more firearms in the United States than there are people. They are ubiquitous. We certainly see them all the time in vehicles and in houses. What would you say to people let's say a parent who may have a gun in the home? What would you say to them about, owning that firearm, storing that firearm, and making sure that people are safe? Well, the training starts when those kids are little. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they need to know that if they see a firearm, go tell your mom, go mm-hmm. tell your neighbor, or whatever, mm-hmm. and keep them locked up. Mm-hmm. Keep them locked mm-hmm. up. It's real simple. Yeah. It's real simple. What would you recommend, Sergeant Thompson, for, let's say that we have viewers, particularly parents, anyone with kids in the home or around the home, or who might even be visiting the home. What's your recommendation as far as safe storage? What would you do? There's a whole bunch of different ways to store them. Mm-hmm. Some people lock up the gun over here, mm-hmm. and the ammo over here. Mm-hmm. Well, I have different thoughts on that, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But I mean, whatever people are comfortable with, but that's one way to do it. Right. If somebody doesn't want to spend a lot of money, they can buy gun safes and that kind of thing. Correct. Are there other things that you might recommend? Keep them out of their reach. Just keep them out of their reach, period? Keep them out of their reach and tell them. It's all about education. Okay. I've had people tell me, well, gee, do I want to talk to my kid when they're really, really young? Do you think that there's an age that is too young to get into sort of a direct message about firearms with kids? None. Okay. I don't think there's so no matter what the age, and what is the simple message that you would tell people to tell particularly I'm talking about 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds, what's the simple direct message that you'd have them tell their kids? Don't touch them, mm-hmm. and contact one of your a parent or a grown-up. Right. It's pretty simple. Okay. It's pretty simple.
course, we had the tragic case here in the city of Bremerton just not very long ago at Armandjar Elementary, where I believe he was 9-year-old brought unfortunately a firearm to school. It fired. Obviously, Amina Bowman was seriously injured. That has to do with storage and access, and parents obviously need to take responsibility. In terms of the other storage issue I was going to ask you about is a lot of our detectives will tell me that a lot of the firearms that they're seeing that are being used by criminals are firearms that were stolen from people's homes in burglaries all over the place, all over the region. What would you recommend to people that don't have kids at home, but it's just a matter of making sure that if somebody does come into their home that they can't steal that firearm? Any good advice on that?
Gun safes.
Okay.
Gun safes are the way to go.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not talking these little ones where they
Right.
can pick up and
Right.
take out with them.
Walk out
I'm
with
talking the ones that are anchored to your floor.
Okay. So in other words, something that can be physically anchored to the floor,
Right.
or is a weight that simply can't be picked up. Those are the keys.
Correct.
And one of the things I was going to mention too, as you were saying that, was I'm surprised by how many times I've gone to take burglary reports in my career, where the gun safe is giant and it's very secure, but they never close it and they never lock it.
Yeah, they never spin the dial. Yeah.
It's standing open. So if you get a gun safe, make sure you use it and actually lock it up. Just going back to what we started talking a little bit about, Sergeant Thompson, as I said, most police officers will finish their career and never use a firearm. But when it's required, it's required. It's something that we have to be comfortable with and have to be proficient with. And I just want to mention to you that as a veteran supervisor with our police department, you go above and beyond to get certified, to spend time with our officers, to make sure that they're proficient, because you care about their safety and the safety of the public. And I want to thank you for your good work.
Thank you, Chief.
Sergeant Mark Thompson, one of the many outstanding members of the Bremerton Police Department. We are really proud to serve the community of Bremerton, just as I'm very, very proud to serve as your police chief. Our guest this week talking about firearms safety, firearms training that our police officers do is Sergeant Mark Thompson. We hope that these programs and BPD Update just get you up to date on what we're doing at the Bremerton Police Department, give you a little bit of information about your police department, because we are very proud to serve you. We'll see you next time on BPD Update.